Blue and red lights washed over the hospital parking lot, their reflection bleeding across the rain-slick pavement. Inside, the sterile hallway smelled of bleach and betrayal. I watched from my wheelchair as my parents walked past me, heads high, faces smug, leaving my belongings stacked in a trash bag by the nurse's station. The whispers of the staff followed them like shadows. They're abandoning him? After everything? My parents didn't flinch. They thought this was their victory, that leaving me here in a coma, then pretending I didn't exist, was the final nail in my coffin. Their smirks told me they believed I was too broken, too voiceless, to ever fight back. But the truth? That night wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something they never expected. I gripped the armrest of my chair, my pulse pounding louder than the heart monitor beside me. They thought this would break me, but they had no idea what was coming. Growing up, I wasn't the problem child. I wasn't the golden one either. I was invisible. While my siblings were showered with gifts, praise, and endless excuses for their mistakes, I was the one expected to stay out of the way, keep quiet, and not cause trouble. My parents had this twisted way of showing favoritism. They called it balance. But balance meant my brothers and sisters got the spotlight while I lived in the shadows. Still, I tried. I studied harder. I worked longer. I even picked up part-time jobs during high school so I wouldn't have to ask them for money. Every paycheck went into a small tin box I kept under my bed, my piggy bank of freedom, though I didn't know it at the time. I remember the smell of grease on my clothes after late-night shifts at the diner, the sting of soap as I scrubbed dishes until my hands cracked, the hollow silence at home when I returned, tired but proud, only to see my siblings lounging in the living room, scrolling through their brand-new phones that my parents had bought for them. "Why don't you ever spoil me like that?" I once asked. My mother didn't even look up. "Because you're responsible. You don't need those things." At the time, I swallowed it, but the truth was clear. The more I gave, the more they took. Years passed, and that pattern never changed. Every family dinner turned into a stage where my parents bragged about my siblings' smallest accomplishments while my own were brushed aside. A scholarship I earned was dismissed with a shrug. A promotion at work was barely acknowledged. But when something went wrong, then they remembered me. When bills piled up, I was the one asked to help out just this once. When a sibling got into trouble, I was sent to bail them out, quietly, without thanks. And still, I gave. Because deep down, I thought maybe, one day, they'd see me. The breaking point came the night of my accident. It was raining hard and I was driving home after a double shift. I'd just stopped at the corner store to pick up groceries, milk, bread, a cheap pack of instant noodles. That was when the truck swerved across the lane. The world exploded into screeching tires, shattering glass, and the metallic crunch of steel folding in on itself. Then, blackness. I woke up weeks later, the taste of metal still in my mouth, a tube down my throat, and the beeping of machines reminding me I was alive, barely. And here's the sting. When I opened my eyes, no one was there. My parents hadn't kept vigil by my bedside. They hadn't brought flowers or whispered prayers over my unconscious body. The nurses told me the truth with pity in their eyes. "They visited once," a nurse admitted softly. "But they said, 'You were on your own now.' On my own, in a coma. Their child." It was more than abandonment. It was humiliation. I saw the way other families came and went from the ward. Balloons, stuffed animals, laughter through tears. My room was silent, empty except for the humming machines and the antiseptic sting in the air. Days blurred. Weeks passed. And every time the door creaked open, I hoped. But it was never them. Instead, I overheard things. My parents laughing in the cafeteria one afternoon, telling relatives on the phone that maybe this was for the best, that he was always too independent anyway, that if he doesn't make it, At least we won't have to deal with his medical bills. That was the first time I felt rage burn hotter than despair. The piggy bank, the years of sacrifice, the silence. It all came flooding back, twisting into one bitter realization. I had been nothing more than a convenience to them, and when I needed them most, they walked away. I remember staring at the blank ceiling tiles, my fists curling weakly against the sheets, and whispering under my breath, "They think this will break me." But deep inside something was shifting. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Recovery wasn't easy. Every step felt like walking through fire. My legs stiff, my hands trembling, my voice faint. But I pushed myself. I learned to eat again, to grip a pen, to take slow steps with a walker. And the entire time, my parents never came back. At first I told myself maybe they were busy, maybe guilt kept them away. But then the bills started arriving, and with them, the truth. My name was on everything. The hospital stay, the ambulance, the therapy sessions. My parents had signed forms releasing themselves of responsibility. They hadn't just abandoned me. They'd erased me. Rumors spread through the family. My cousins called, whispering awkward condolences. One aunt told me flat out, "Your parents said you've always been difficult. They said you didn't want their help difficult." That word haunted me. Was it difficult to survive on my own? Difficult to not be their puppet? Difficult to expect love from the people who were supposed to give it freely? The worst part wasn't the gossip. It was the silence in my apartment once I was discharged. I'd traded the beeping of hospital machines for the hum of a refrigerator and the distant barking of dogs in the alley. No balloons, no welcome home. Just empty walls and medical paperwork stacked on my kitchen table. Nights were the hardest. I'd wake drenched in sweat, replaying the accident, my parents' laughter in the cafeteria, the words, "You're on your own now." My chest would tighten until I couldn't breathe. I stopped answering calls. I stopped eating. My body was healing, but my spirit was cracking. There were days I thought maybe my parents were right, that I was too independent, too stubborn, too unworthy. And then came the spark. It was a Tuesday morning. The sun was a pale streak through the blinds, dust floating like tiny stars in the air. I dragged myself to physical therapy, shuffling into the sterile room where the smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint tang of rubber mats. That's where I met her, Sophia. She was another patient, recovering from a car accident too. She had a scar running down her arm and a determination in her eyes that mirrored my own. "You're here alone?" she asked, as I struggled with the parallel bars. I nodded. "Always." She tilted her head. "Me too." Then she smiled, just a small, knowing smile. "Guess that makes us allies." The word hit me harder than I expected. Allies. I hadn't thought of myself as having anyone in my corner, but Sophia kept showing up. She encouraged me when I wanted to give up. She laughed at my dark jokes about hospital food and awkward therapists. She reminded me, without ever saying it, that I wasn't invisible. One evening, after therapy, we sat on the steps outside the clinic. The city buzzed around us, horns honking, the smell of food carts in the air, the cool breeze brushing against my skin. She told me her story, parents who blamed her for the accident, who called her careless instead of comforting her. And then she looked at me and said, "Sometimes family isn't blood. Sometimes it's who shows up when everyone else leaves." That was the first time I realized I wasn't entirely alone. But my parents weren't finished. They started calling again, not to check on me, but to warn me. They'd heard whispers I might be seeking legal action for the abandonment, for the forged signatures on the hospital forms. My father's voice on the phone was cold. "You don't want to make this ugly," he said. "Families should keep things quiet." I almost laughed. Quiet was all they'd ever given me. Sophia's words echoed in my head. Sometimes family isn't blood. That night, I opened the tin piggy bank I'd kept since high school. The coins clattered onto the table, the old bills worn thin. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Proof of every hour I'd worked, every sacrifice I'd made. I tucked the money back inside, my hands shaking, not from weakness, but from something I hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. This wasn't over. And for the first time, I knew I had an ally. The call from my father wasn't the end. It was the beginning of their counterattack. Within weeks, I was summoned to a family meeting. My parents had rented out the back room of a restaurant, the kind with dim lighting, tacky wallpaper, and the smell of fried food clinging to the curtains. When I arrived, I realized this wasn't a family dinner. It was a trial. My siblings were seated like jurors, arms crossed, eyes already poisoned by the stories my parents had fed them. My mother sat at the head of the table, her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've been making threats," she began, her tone dripping with false concern. "We just want to help you, but if you're going to accuse us of things we didn't do..." Didn't do? My medical bills said otherwise. The forged signatures on the release forms said otherwise. I kept my voice calm. "You abandoned me when I was in a coma. The hospital has the paperwork. Don't act like I imagined it." A murmur rippled through my siblings. One of them, my younger brother, snapped, "You're just trying to make them look bad. They've done everything for you. Everything." The word almost broke me into laughter, but I held it in. That's when my father leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "If you go through with this, if you make this public, you'll regret it. You think people will believe you over us? We have the resources, the reputation. You'll be painted as the ungrateful son who can't let go of a grudge." For a moment, I felt cornered. Their power wasn't just money, it was control. They had always shaped the narrative. They'd turned relatives against me, neighbors too. To them, I was the difficult one, the outsider. But then I remembered something. The tin piggy bank. The years of sacrifice. The quiet evidence I'd collected without even realizing it. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of the hospital forms, the ones with their signatures removing responsibility. I slid them across the table. The room went silent. My siblings leaned forward, confusion flickering across their faces. My mother's smile faltered, my father's jaw tightened. "This isn't about grudges," I said evenly. "This is about truth. You left me to die, and now you want to bury the evidence. But the hospital doesn't lie. Paperwork doesn't lie." For the first time, I saw something flicker in their eyes. Fear, but instead of stopping, they doubled down. My mother slammed the papers back toward me. "You think this proves anything? You were always dramatic. We signed what we had to because we couldn't afford your care. We had to protect the rest of the family. That's what parents do." My stomach twisted at her words. Protect the rest of the family. Not me. Never me. One sibling shook their head. "This is insane. He's making us look like monsters." My father leaned back, regaining his smug composure. "Take this to court if you want. But remember, you don't have the money. You don't have the connections. We do." They thought they still had control. But they didn't know about Sophia. She'd been helping me quietly, introducing me to her lawyer friend, who specialized in medical rights. We'd already begun preparing a case, gathering testimony from nurses who remembered overhearing my parents' cold words in the cafeteria. I didn't reveal all of that yet. Instead, I met my father's glare and said simply, "You're right. Families should keep things quiet, but when families fail, the law doesn't." His smirk wavered, just slightly, but enough. I stood, sliding the folder back into my bag. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed steady. "They thought they still had control," I whispered to myself as I walked out. They didn't. If the family meeting was their opening move, What followed was all-out war. Within days, whispers began to spread through the neighborhood. Old friends stopped calling. Neighbors who used to wave from across the street now looked away, pretending not to see me. My landlord even hinted that someone had called to complain I was dangerous and unstable. It didn't take long to trace it back. My parents had gone into overdrive, spinning their story. The ungrateful son, the troublemaker, the one who twisted facts to get sympathy. They painted me as vindictive, unstable, obsessed with destroying the family's reputation. They even claimed they'd sacrificed everything for me, but I chose to hate them. For a while, I felt the pressure mounting. Alone in my apartment, surrounded by stacks of medical bills and the faint smell of old coffee, I couldn't shake the sense that they were winning. My chest would tighten until I had to press my hand against it, whispering to myself just to breathe. But then, I remembered something Sophia had told me. When they smear you, document it. Lies fall apart under the weight of truth. So I began to fight back, not with shouting, not with gossip, but with strategy. Every rumor, every phone call, every hostile text. I saved it all. I printed screenshots, recorded voicemails, gathered witness statements from neighbors who admitted my parents had come knocking, warning them about me. Slowly, my apartment transformed into a war room, walls lined with folders and notes. The symbolic piggy bank, the tin box that had once been my secret lifeline, sat in the center of my desk. I placed copies of the most damning evidence inside it, turning it into something more than just a container of coins. It was a vault of truth, proof that years of sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Meanwhile, my parents cracked under their own lies. The more stories they spread, the more contradictions piled up. One cousin heard that I had stolen money from them. Another was told I refused their help. A neighbor said my father claimed I was mentally unstable since childhood. None of it lined up. Sophia helped me see it clearly. The harder they fight, the weaker their mask becomes. And she was right. Their desperation showed in every frantic phone call, every exaggerated story. They were losing control. I started therapy too, not just for my body, but for my mind. The weight of betrayal doesn't lift easily, but each session helped me untangle the guilt I'd carried for years, the belief that maybe I deserved their neglect. My therapist's words echoed with each breakthrough. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. Armed with that truth, I grew bolder. I filed official complaints with the hospital administration, attaching the forged release forms. I submitted preliminary paperwork for a lawsuit. And quietly, I informed my siblings, at least the ones still willing to listen, that the truth would come out in court. Some stopped responding. Others sent messages filled with venom. But one sister, just one, texted me late at night. I don't know if I can say this out loud, but I believe you. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The day of reckoning was coming. I could feel it in every hostile glare my parents shot me at family gatherings, in the way their voices grew sharper, more frantic. Their empire of lies was cracking, piece by piece. And I wasn't the fragile boy they thought I was. I was a man armed with evidence, allies, and a resolve stronger than their control. Standing in my apartment one night, I pressed my hand against the piggy bank. Its cool metal surface felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried not just coins and papers, but years of silence waiting to be broken. I whispered to myself, a promise that echoed through the empty room. The day of reckoning is coming, and no one can stop it. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Every sound, the shuffle of papers, the squeak of shoes on polished floors, seemed amplified by the silence that hung in the air. I sat at the plaintiff's table, the piggy bank resting inside my bag like a secret weapon. Sophia sat behind me, her steady presence grounding me. My lawyer, calm and focused, arranged the evidence in neat stacks. When my parents entered, it was like watching a performance. My mother wore black, as though in mourning, her face twisted in practiced grief. My father strode in confidently, nodding to relatives they had convinced to attend. Their smug expressions screamed one message: "We've already won." The judge called for order, and the hearing began. My parents' lawyer was slick, spinning stories with ease. He painted them as selfless caregivers, burdened by financial hardship, who had no choice but to make difficult decisions. Every word dripped with manipulation. "He has twisted the truth," the lawyer said, gesturing toward me. "This young man has always been independent, sometimes recklessly so. His parents tried to help, but he pushed them away. Now, out of bitterness, he seeks to punish them." I could feel eyes turning toward me, the weight of judgment pressing against my chest. My parents sat straighter, confidence radiating from their smiles. But then, it was my turn. My lawyer stood. "We'd like to submit evidence," he said, handing the judge a folder. Inside were the forged hospital release forms, the testimony from nurses who remembered my parents' callous remarks, the messages and voicemails where they admitted leaving me behind. The courtroom grew still. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's hands fidgeted in her lap. And then, I reached into my bag. Slowly, deliberately, I placed the piggy bank on the table. Its clink against the wood echoed like a gunshot. "This," I said, my voice steady, "isn't just a piggy bank. It's every hour I worked to support myself while my siblings were handed everything. It's proof that I've been responsible since I was a child, not reckless." And inside, I opened the tin, pulling out the folded papers I'd stored there, is the truth they've tried to bury. I laid out receipts from my years of paying bills on their behalf, documents showing how often I had covered expenses they couldn't, or wouldn't, handle. The judge flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. The gallery behind us was silent, save for the occasional gasp. My mother's mask cracked first. Her eyes darted wildly, her breathing shallow. My father leaned forward as though he could will the documents out of existence. I looked at them, really looked, and for the first time I felt no fear, only clarity. "They left me in a hospital bed to die," I said, my voice ringing across the courtroom. "And now they want to paint me as the villain for surviving." But I'm done being silent. Silence fell. The kind of silence that carries weight. The judge's gavel struck once, the sound sharp and final. My parents' empire had collapsed. My mother buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking, not from grief, but from the crumbling of her performance. My father sat frozen, the confidence drained from his face, his hands trembling against the table. I stood slowly, every movement deliberate. Years of pain, humiliation, and abandonment seemed to lift from my shoulders as I turned to them one last time. "I don't want apologies," I said, my voice calm and unshakable. "I want change." And with that, I walked out of the courtroom, not broken, not defeated, but free. After the hearing, the silence that had once suffocated me felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean, like the stillness after a storm when the sky finally clears. The court had ruled in my favor. The forged forms, the testimonies, the evidence stacked high against my parents. It was undeniable. Their reputation crumbled in one afternoon, and the fallout spread faster than their lies ever had. Neighbors who once avoided me now looked at me differently, some with regret, others with quiet respect. A few relatives even reached out, offering apologies for believing my parents' stories. But I didn't need their validation. For the first time, I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. My parents, stripped of their control, faded into the background. They lost their position as the perfect couple, the ones everyone admired. My siblings, divided, either distanced themselves or stayed silent. The empire they had built on favoritism and fear had collapsed, and me, I finally began to live. I moved into a small but sun-lit apartment, walls painted a soft cream that made the place glow during golden hour. The air carried the faint scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. Sophia helped me furnish it, bringing in second-hand chairs and curtains patterned with little blue waves. For the first time, the space felt mine. The piggy bank sat on my shelf, not as a hidden vault anymore, but as a framed reminder of survival. Inside, instead of worn coins, I placed small notes to myself, words like freedom, courage, worth. Every time I looked at it, I remembered what I had overcome. I built new routines. Therapy sessions continued, grounding me as I pieced together my sense of self. I picked up writing again, something I had abandoned years ago when my parents dismissed it as a waste of time. Words flowed onto the page like water, telling stories I'd kept locked inside. And Sophia, she became more than an ally. She became family. Not because of obligation, not because of shared blood, but because she chose to stand beside me when no one else did. We shared late-night meals of takeout, laughed until our scars didn't feel so heavy, and planned futures free from the shadows of betrayal. One afternoon, months after the trial, I found myself standing in front of the hospital where it all began. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the air, the walls as white and cold as I remembered. But I wasn't a patient anymore. I wasn't abandoned, waiting, hoping. I walked past the room where I had once lain in silence. I placed my hand against the wall and whispered, "I made it." And I had. The humiliation of the opening chapter, my parents' smug departure, their belief that leaving me broken would be the end, now stood in stark contrast to this moment. I wasn't broken. I was stronger than I had ever been. When people ask if I regret taking them to court, I answer simply, no, because survival isn't enough. Freedom is I no longer carried the weight of needing their love. I had built something better, self-respect, boundaries, and a chosen family that gave me what they never could. As the sun dipped low that evening, casting long shadows across the city, I thought back to the moment in the courtroom when their empire collapsed. The silence, the trembling hands, the truth cutting sharper than any lie. That image wasn't my ending. It was my beginning. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. Maybe you've been there too, left behind, silenced, or made to feel like your worth depended on someone else's approval. Maybe you've faced favoritism, betrayal, or the crushing weight of people who were supposed to protect you, but instead tried to break you. If so, I want to ask you, how did you rise above it? What gave you the strength to stand when everything inside you wanted to collapse? Share your story in the comments. Not just for me, but for the person who might be watching in silence right now, needing proof that they aren't alone. Because here's the truth. Worth isn't something they give you. It's something you claim for yourself. And once you do, no one can take it away.